Okay, so we are moving away from international studies and on to comparative politics. Welcome to Comparative Politics Course Mastery 101. Today we are going to discuss the ins and outs of comparative politics. Along the way, we will cover common course outcomes and goals, assess the different needs of instructors and where we can offer solutions, and help clarify the difference between IR and comparative. So let's get started. All right, so who takes this course? As you can see here, this is another freshman, sophomore level course. It is about 100,000 students a year take this course, so it's a sizable course. And for the most part, the students who take comparative politics are going to be majors. Okay, so what are they here to learn? What are the kind of the goals of this course? Outcomes vary from school to school, instructor to instructor, and book to book, but we've really distilled the outcomes for comparative politics from countless syllabi and textbooks and online programs to come up with this list that we think are really kind of the core objectives for this course. First and foremost, students need to learn to apply the foundational concepts of political science in analyzing political systems, issues, and policies. So what exactly is comparative politics and how does it help us understand relationships between states and citizens? Students need to debate the pros and cons of political systems like democratic and authoritarian governments. So basically understanding the characteristics of different government types and how they rule and how they transition. And finally, analyzing critical issues facing governments today and the policies that address those issues like economic policies, developmental, social, and environmental. So let's drill in a little bit. Foundational concepts. So first and foremost, what is comparative politics? Students need to understand the process of political development and the actual study of comparative, the theories and research methods used among comparativists. Next, students need to know what the modern state actually is. And when we say state, again, we mean really country, right? Or a nation. So they need to give characteristics of a modern state, but also be able to use modern real-world examples to show strong modern states versus weak ones. Finally, unlike international relations, comparative goes deep into the role of the states and the citizens under different governments. So essentially, what is the relationship of states and their citizens? There is a lot to take into account there, like rights, powers, values, history, geography, ethnicities, cultures, religions, etc. Okay, debating the pros and cons of political systems like democratic and authoritarian governments. First, the course covers governing institutions in democracy. There is more than one type of democracy. Students need to discuss the continuum of democracies, the differences between them, and why they differ. Furthermore, they need to identify heads of state in democracies, who is accountable, and how corruption occurs. Next, students discuss participation and representation in democracy, from electoral systems and party systems to interest groups and social movements. Students need to see how participation affects democracy. Students will then go on to discuss authoritarian governments. Like democracies, there are different types of authoritarian governments. They need to know the limits of power and the level of representation available under different regimes. Finally, students learn more about government transitions. So in other words, how do regime changes occur? From revolutions to democratization, this outcome will describe the role of the military in regime changes and discuss reasons for success and failure. Okay, critical issues facing governments today. First up is understanding economics and development issues. So students need to consider how globalization and government types impact economic policy. They will also need to discuss economic development, the process and influences on it, through the use of case studies. Students are then asked to describe important social issues and governmental policies addressing those issues. So debating the government's role in everything, from environmental issues to welfare and healthcare. And as always, use case studies to determine the characteristics of effective social and environmental policies. All right, so those are the kind of course outcomes. Now let's talk a little bit about what your instructor needs are. So what are your instructors going to be wanting to talk to you about when you call on them? Like IR, comparative politics needs to be up to date. So currency and current events are really central to this course. With data changing every day, our products need to be up to date to provide the best material for students to work with when making comparisons between countries. Most of our comparative titles are on a 3-year cycle, which is really typical in the market. So other publishing companies do the same thing. We also have, like I mentioned with IR, we have Lecture Spark in the works for this fall for international politics, which includes comparative. So stay tuned to expand your conversation when it comes to current events. Instructors are picky when it comes to this course. Some still teach from an old-fashioned method of country by country, right? That means every chapter is essentially a long case study of a single country. This is a this method of country by country is slowly dying out, though you will still find it around. Some instructors still use that approach. Others teach from a more thematic approach. It's important to gauge the needs of your instructors here to ensure you're meeting them with the right solution. So what's that first question that you're going to ask? How do you teach your course? How do you organize the country case studies? How do you use case studies? The third is coverage of examples, right? So we're comparing different countries, different regimes, all of that. And when you're comparing them, you need case studies and examples to actually compare. Some instructors want the publisher to provide them. Others are comfortable using their own from other online sources. Asking how to use case studies will help bring to light a lot of the needs of your instructor. If they want clearly marked case studies, Orvis, big, the full Orvis, is the right solution. If they like a light helping of case studies or like just examples really interspersed in the text as more like of examples, Orvis Essentials is the way to go. If they are more concerned about methodology when comparing nations and data, Clark Principles or Clark Foundations is the way to go. And we are going to be spending some time talking about Clark Foundations, your new first edition comparative politics book, which is a spin-off from the full book, in just a few minutes. That's your core book for this fall, your frontlist book for this fall. But before we go there, let's take a few minutes to talk about the difference between comparative politics versus international relations. Now, you may be wondering, what exactly is the difference between the two? They both seem to deal with countries in the world and issues like the environment and war, but consider this. Comparative politics is like comparing apples to oranges. You can look at an apple, think about the different types of apples out there, and see how it grows. You can cut the apple in half, look at the fruit and the seeds, the stem. Similarly, you can cut an orange in half and look at the segments, the seeds, and the color. The same is true of comparative politics. You're looking at nations and understanding how they function, how they started, the inner workings, how the government works with its people, and then you're comparing the nations to one another, the different nations that have different governing bodies. So you're basically looking at them from a comparative lens in order to gain a deeper understanding of the individual nations. On the flip side, international relations differs because it does less of the internal examination of governments and their people and more on the interactions they have with other nations, the role geography plays, the common issues surrounding the world that need tending to, like the environment, and the effects of war and peace on the world. If we stuck with the same analogy, we wouldn't be looking at apples in comparison to oranges. We would be looking at the whole produce section. Where are the fruits placed geographically? What are the prices? That's like the economy. How well they blend, which would be relations. And the role of the grocer when an item of produce begins to rot or gets badly bruised, aka the role of international law and NGOs. Okay, enough fruit. You get the idea. Okay, so we're going to have you take a little break now just to make sure that you really are thinking about the course dynamics and course outcomes. We want you to fill in 2 discovery questions. This probably sounds familiar. You just did this with IR. 1 current state question and 1 desired state question. Please do not be vague with this. We want this to be really specific. Think about some really comparative questions, specific to comparative that you're going to ask when you get into your comparative call this fall. All righty, good luck.